Thank you all for joining us for the final SICSS-Howard Mathematica guest lecture of 2021. I am joined by Timnit Gebru, who will introduce in just a moment. This final talk of the summer will take on a Q&A format. My name is Naniette Coleman, and I will be conducting the interview today. I'm a proud alumna of SICSS Princeton 2019, a Ph.D. candidate in the sociology department at the University of California, Berkeley, and the inaugural organizer of the SICSS-Howard Mathematica 2021 partner site, the first SICSS to be held at a historically Black university. Today, it is my honor to introduce our final guest, the inimitable Timnit Gebru. I say she is one of a kind, but as you will discover over the next hour during our one-on-one interview, Timnit has spent a large part of her career making sure that she is not unique, that the work of other people that look like us see the light of day, and that many, many others can and will follow behind her. I will begin by introducing our speaker, and we'll close with a few resources for you to get to know SICSS-Howard Mathematica if you are joining us for the first time. Let's get started. While there were numerous bios to choose from for Timnit, I have opted for the one recently printed in Fortune when she was awarded one of its world's greatest leader spots this year. I will read their description of the award and why she was selected. On the award, some were already extraordinary achievers in business, government, philanthropy, athletics, and the arts. Others were ordinary citizens. In truly unprecedented times, each stepped up to make the world better and inspired others to do the same. A well-respected researcher and one of the most prominent Black women working in artificial intelligence, Gebru has tirelessly sounded the alarm about how AI bias can perpetuate inequality. Last year, her warnings seemed to become inconvenient truths for her employer, Google. In December, after Gebru questioned the company's commitment to diversity and was asked to withdraw a research paper she had co-authored about the risks of large language models, or AI trained on huge amounts of text, Google forced her out. Her departure galvanized protests from thousands of AI professionals, including many of her former Google colleagues, some of whom quit in solidarity. Others cited Gebru's experience and Google's subsequent firing of Margaret Mitchell, another senior AI ethicist, as fuel for unionization efforts. Despite online tech companies, despite online harassment, she has continued to speak out, amplifying a long simmering reckoning over big tech companies' lack of racial and gender diversity and their blindness to potential biases in the enormously powerful technology they create. Welcome, Timnit. Thank you for joining us. The questions I'm going to ask.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. This is such a treat. So the questions I'm going to ask you have been written by members of our team, including undergraduate students, some grad students across all of our SICSS locations, actually some from our SICSS founders, and some from our other amazing speakers who found out you were coming and just started sending me emails. So they've broken up into 7 sections. We'll learn a little bit about you and your background first, what your path to the PhD looked like before we jump into questions about artificial intelligence, algorithmic bias, tech representation research, and if we have time, regulatory and legal structures, and maybe I'll end with asking you what I should have asked you. So let's get started. I want our viewers to get to know you. Origin matters. Can we start there? How did you figure out that you wanted to focus your one wild life on AI?
I didn't figure it out, so let me just start there. I think that in hindsight, many times things look planned and coordinated and just, a straight path, but that's really not how it happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll be super honest with you. We might have to do multiple recordings because I'm going to tell you. I'll be super honest with you and tell you the story.
Super honest is what we want, please.
Yeah, because I really do think it's important for people to see the struggles that, that all of us go through and understand that everyone goes through these struggles and that it's just not this straight, path to what seems like success. So I was born and raised in Ethiopia, and my parents are Eritrean, and so I was born and raised in Addis, which is Addis Ababa, which is capital city of Ethiopia, and so I went to an all-girls school, all girls, a school run by Catholic nuns, and so you would think that it's, you know, it was super strict, but you would think that what's really interesting that all the girls, all the women who went into those schools ended up being super independent and just don't take, you know, stuff from from men. And so because of that, and because, you know, my father died when I was 5 years old, and I was, you know, I have two sisters, I was raised by my mom. I never saw, you know, women are not supposed to do this, you know, women are not supposed to do science, or what. I just, it never really occurred to me. The second thing is, because I grew up in an African country, everybody's Black. I never sort of, you know, the racism you experience in white spaces was a bit, it was, I understood it in an abstract sense, but I didn't really experience it myself. Now, there was ethnic-based tension, which was very, very serious. But after I, you know, what I experienced after coming to the US, it was still very, very, very different. Well, Eritrea was colonized, actually, and so for instance, my grandfather lived under Italian rule, and the Italians didn't allow Eritreans to go to school past the 5th grade or 4th grade or something like that. Eritreans had to sit in the back of the bus. In fact, my grandfather's brother, my great uncle, went to prison because he wouldn't sit, you know, he refused to sit in the back of the bus, etc. So this is how I grew up. And my dad was an electrical engineer. And my sisters also followed his footsteps and became electrical engineers. And when I went to school, I was interested in, I was naturally interested in math and physics. Math is, I don't know, there was something that interested me about it. I was also very hyper, like I would, you know, always go to the principal's office and all that. Just, they thought I was super hyper. So I had this love, the teachers liked me, but they also kind of found me like a little bit too hyper and stuff. But I didn't do anything that bad, but I was just like always like laughing too much or doing whatever in classes. And I also liked music when I was in school. So I started playing piano randomly. My cousin got me registered for a piano school when I was like 7 years old. And so the one thing I really appreciate about my upbringing is I never was taught that any of these things were in conflict with each other. The one thing I realized when I came to the States is that people are put in buckets. So you're either the nerd or the athlete or the popular girl or the pretty girl or the, you know, there's just these buckets that are not overlapping, or the artist, or, you know, and so I never experienced that. So I mean, just looking back, thinking about why this was so important in my life. So all of a sudden, when I was 15, on my 15th birthday, a war was waged. And in like, you know, so the one disruptive time was when my father died when I was 5, and my mom had to figure out what to do. My sisters had to, you know, come to the States, and that was another time of political unrest, and a very dangerous time in Ethiopia, and especially for Eritreans. The second time was, like I said, when I was 15. So when I was 5, and then when I was 15, where we had to just leave. So, you know, May war was announced. By September, I was out. October, my mom was out. You know, that's kind of how fast we had to do it. My family, members of my family were deported. It was just havoc. So at that time, when I was 15, I tried to apply for a visa to come to the States, or any place really, or the UK or wherever. And none of them would give me a visa. And we'll get back to that later, because this is a very important thing for me, because the discriminatory visa practices towards people of African descent is something that I think people don't really realize the extent of how much this affects a big part of the global population. I finally was able to go to Ireland because my sister, who at that point had been in the States for like 10 years, was just randomly in Ireland. She convinced them. They said no. She convinced them that it's going to be temporary. It's just until my mom comes to the States. I'm going to, you know, I'm not going to stay in Ireland and all that. My mom was lucky enough to have had a visa to come to the States before. That lasted a while because my sister was graduating. So she came to the States. I waited in Ireland. And I got until my mom did all the paperwork for political asylum. And then let me tell you a couple of things that I experienced in Ireland. The American embassy, it was very clear they didn't want me in the States. I was 15. So for instance, they would have to just sign paperwork. Everything was set for me to come, sign paperwork. They wouldn't want it. They don't want to do it. Finally, older people who I met there and stuff would come with me to the embassy and ask them, why are you doing this to a little girl, a teenager? And they were like, oh, you should come on, Friday at 4 p.m. or whatever, and we'll do it then. But then I find out Friday, 4 p.m. is when they would close. So, I would get in all the way up to finally my ticket was, we bought our ticket. I was about to fly out. I was the last person on the plane because they would call my name on the intercom and harass me and call me back. So this is how I got to the States. So when I was on the plane, this woman next to me said, oh, going home? And I actually cried. Like, I don't think she said I had tears because I'm like, oh my God, this is the place I'm going to. Where am I going? Where am I going? And, I left all of my comfort, all of the things I just told you about, not thinking about, being a woman, all of that. Then first day of school in the US, my very first day of school. I don't know how the systems work. I don't know what AP is. I don't know what honors is. I don't understand what, So I go to chemistry class and I go to the first class, and Mr. Torello, the chemistry teacher at the time, this was in Boston, in Somerville, home of the abolitionists, right? It's home of the liberal, people. And he talks about how what they're going to cover. This is we're going to cover this. And then I said, I've covered all of this in Ireland last year, so can I move a level up? This was my very first day of school. This guy doesn't know anything about me, who I am, where I'm from, nothing. So then he tells me, I've met so many people like you who come from other countries, and they think that they can come here and take the hardest classes. If you took the exams that these people take, you would fail. So guess what? I never took chemistry in high school in the States. I was like, I'm not going to take chemistry. I'm going to go try to figure out something else. So that was my arrival to the US, and that set the stage for everything else I experienced in the US. They did not disappoint. That school did not disappoint. They told me I wouldn't get into college, any of the colleges I applied to. They told me, and after I got into Stanford, my guidance counselor thought, when I went to say goodbye, he thought I was dropping out. And he's like, did you drop out? I'm like, no, I'm here to say bye. Like, I'm about to go to college. So this was my experience in high school. Then I go to Stanford. I'm like traumatized by everything I experienced in my high school. And the history that you learn when you come to the States as an immigrant is obviously, we know, from the 1619 project. And of course, they denied her tenure because they don't want to hear the truth. We know what the real history is, and we know that's not what's told. And so what I was taught in school just did not compute with what I experienced. So I'm just traumatized. I go to college, and then what they say, oh, you're so lucky you got in because of affirmative action and all of that at Stanford. So at this point, I was just like, I need to learn some real history because this just is not making any sense to me. So when I was at Stanford, I took class on African American civil rights in the 20th century, and then I was like, okay, this makes sense. This is what's going on. So at that point, I hadn't really thought through what I should study in terms of, my major or whatever. So I was like, well, I like math, I like physics, let me continue electrical engineering, just like my dad, just like my sisters. But at the same time, I like music. So let me try to double major in music too. I dropped the double major in music because there was just some other classes I wasn't interested in taking. It was just, some stuff I was like, I don't have to double major in music to do my music. But at some point, I try to still connect my interest in music and engineering. So I got a job at Apple by accident, like an internship by accident, where it was in the audio group. And I was, and all of them were sort of musicians in some way and engineers. So I thought, okay, yeah, this is a place where I can do music and do electrical engineering and whatever. So I was doing that. And at some point I decided to do a master's. Seems like, master's seems like you do, I don't see the harm, especially if it's funded. So I'll work at Apple, apply for, scholarships, etc. And so that's what I did. And then I went back to school. And I did my, I started doing my master's in electrical engineering. At that time, I started having a lot of health issues, stress-induced health issues. So I've been reading this book. What is it called? Mind-Body Connection, Healing the Body, Healing the Pain. So this was about 2007, 2008. I couldn't raise my hand like this. I couldn't write. I couldn't read. I had to have these neck braces. I couldn't hold anything. I couldn't, like I couldn't hold my phone like this or a fork or anything. So I was just freaked out. I was just like, what am I going to do? So I had to slow down and sort of try to figure this out. So for 2 years, so I had a scholarship, but I needed income. I had to slow down. So I was like, what am I going to do? I'm going to like just take, okay, like I like languages, learning languages. I'll take Chinese communication, like so that oral Chinese class, so I don't have to write. So I'm going to do that. That's what I was trying to figure out. And I had to spend literally full time trying to heal myself. So after a while, doing that about 2009, 2010, I thought I could try to just go for a PhD. I really don't remember how I even arrived at that decision, because I've always thought doing a PhD was completely pointless. And so I don't remember why.
There wasn't a person or a lightning moment.
No, absolutely not a lightning moment, not a person. I just, I know what it was. I didn't like being obligated in school. I didn't like, you do this, and you get an A. You do this, and you have to do this homework. You do this. I just didn't like that. But I liked learning. So when I played piano, I enjoyed, I learned at my own pace. I didn't have to do this, and then I get that. So I really hated that. So I thought I was very misguided at the time. Now I've done
aren't we all, when we arrive at a PhD program, I'm like, I got this. No, I don't. It's going to change you.
I was very misguided. I was like, oh, a PhD, I get to do research. I get to learn at my own pace. I don't have to worry about grades. I don't have to, and it sounds like a good thing. So let me do some research, independent study, and let me see if I like it. So I was doing it with a professor at the time, and it was on something called device physics. So still in the line of electrical engineering and all that. So when I was doing that, I felt extremely isolated. I was the only woman. I was the only Black person. I was the only this. It was just, everything was extremely isolating. And but at that time is when I decided I'll take the quals. I'll do whatever I need to do to give myself a chance of doing a PhD. And at the time, also the first Black woman professor came to Stanford in this department. She has actually since left. So that tells you what the environment is. First Black woman came. She got tenure. She was like, nope, I'm not going to stay here. Left. So she's no longer there. But I was super excited. I'm like, oh my God, I want to work with her. I don't know. What does she do? Optics? I don't know optics, but fine. I'll just learn optics. I'll do. So and it wasn't super, far. So I was doing device physics, but optics was still physics. So I just had to learn a little bit more. So I tried to work with her, but I still was like, you know what, a PhD is not for me. It's too isolating. I'm not going to do this. So 2011, decided to leave my PhD, dropped out. Like, what am I going to do? I don't know. So I was like, everybody talks about startups. I'll just, I'll do a startup. I'll try to figure it out. What am I going to do a startup on? I don't know. I mean, there's this opportunity where they give you some money to try to figure out what you're going to do at a startup, to do need finding and find a team, whatever. So I did that for like 9 months or so. But it didn't, there was 3 co-founders, me and one of them really clicked, but the third person didn't click, whatever. So it didn't really work out. I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? Like, I don't know. So I was like, oh, there is this thing called Hacker School that sounds great in New York for 3 months. You just like write code, whatever. You don't really do anything else. And they give you a grant. And I get to dance all the time. I'm in New York. I love dancing. I love New York-based salsa. So I'm going to do that. I did that for 3 months. It was great. The problem is I came back. And at this point, I was 29. I don't know what happened. I came back. I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? I worked at Apple. Then I did this. Then I did that. Then I did this other thing. And I don't know what I'm doing in my life. And I don't know what I'm going to do next. Am I going to do a PhD? Am I going to do this? I was hit with this crippling anxiety. Couldn't do anything. If I was going to do an interview, couldn't prepare for it because my mind is racing. I can't think about my next steps. I can't do whatever. So I had to like take a few months to just literally just kind of try to figure this out. Then I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. What I'm going to do is relieve the pressure for myself to figure out my life. So the first step is I was like, I could still, enroll in the PhD. I don't have to do the PhD, but also I don't need to pay like a lot of tuition or this. Thankfully, my partner had a job, right? So I was like, I don't have a lot of financial expenses. And so I'm just going to take a couple of classes and I don't have to do well. I'm just telling myself like, I don't have to do this. And I don't have to relieve all of that pressure. So in 2013, I went back to do my PhD. I re-enrolled. And I took this, at that time during my time off, I'd been kind of independently looking at machine learning classes, AI, I guess. But at that time, it wasn't really computer vision classes, whatever. I was kind of getting interested in it. And so I said, yeah, I'll just take a couple of classes. I don't have to do well. And I was still anxious. I remember if I felt like I wasn't doing or whatever, I would just be like, oh my God. And then I'll remind myself, be like, no, I don't, this is not for anything. Doesn't matter. So at that time, I took a class from Feifei Li, and I was like, oh, this sounds interesting. Like maybe I'll try to work with her over the summer and I'll see how it goes.
And was she ultimately your dissertation advisor?
Then she was my advisor.
Yeah.
I started working on this project. She was like telling me about this project that they're working on. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll work on that. I'll see how it goes. That became my dissertation. And that's how I did my PhD. I'm sorry, it was a long story, but
no, yeah, I appreciate how honest you are. So many people look in retrospect and make it all fit together. But what do they say? That you head in with the best of intentions, and somewhere in the middle you figure it out. So your honesty is
that's
deeply
how
appreciated.
That's how I did my PhD, and then later. Basically later, towards 2016 or so, when I was about to be done, and then I started my PhD again. I was working. Still, there was a lot less isolation for other things, but still there were no Black people and all of that. Just there's still a lot of isolation. And I'd go to conferences, I'd get harassed, all sorts of harassment, sexual harassment, other kinds of harassment, whatever, you name it. And then I came back and I was like, I wrote an article. An anonymous article that I was going to send out. And then people said to me that everybody would know it's me. So don't, it's not going to be anonymous. So if you're going to send it out, just like, understand it's not going to be anonymous.
Yeah.
Yeah. I never ended up sending it, but this was in 2015 when my first time at a conference called NeurIPS. So it's a machine learning conference, largest one. At the same time, this company, OpenAI, was announced. I don't know if you guys have heard of OpenAI. So OpenAI is a nonprofit. One of the things they're known for right now is they came up with language technology called GPT-3. Fast forward, I got fired for writing about this kind of stuff. So this language technology called GPT-3, there's a lot of issues. So it's trained on massive amounts of data on the web, etc. But there's a number of issues. One of them is it can generate language that is extremely toxic, racist, and all of that. So OpenAI was formed in 2015, the company that came up with this technology. And some people from my lab at Stanford were involved, and there was a lot of fanfare when they were announced, and they were announced to save AI from humanity. I'm sorry, to save humanity from AI. It was supposed to be an AI first company, you know, ethics and all of that first company, and save the world from all these big companies. I'm looking at this, I'm like, here are 8 white guys and 2 Asian women basically are gonna save all of us from AI. I was so angry. And then I was seeing all of the conferences stuff. So I wrote about this. I'm looking back. So this is basically when I really wanted to start at Black in AI. So there are a group called Black in AI that now has, you know, it's an international group of over 3,800 people. We have lots of programs.
And we have actually a panel from some of your board members this summer from Black in AI. Yeah, there's going to be a panel from them also, which we're very excited about. So just so for our listeners who may not have gone the path that you did into a PhD and know this work as in depth as you do, can we start with what's the potential negative impact of algorithmic systems, and why is this the place to intervene for people that are starting at first principles here?
Yeah, so so going back to why I started Black in AI. So at this point in 2015, like I said, this company OpenAI was created to, the first company that I know of, to save humanity from AI. At the same time in so 2015 at the same time, Joy Buolamwini, who you all might have heard of, but if you haven't, you really need to hear about her. There's this documentary called Coded Bias about her journey that I think is a must watch for everyone. So Joy Buolamwini was trying to do this art class or whatever, and she found that when she was trying to use these face detection models, so they just detect your face, they wouldn't detect her face. She would put in a white mask, they would detect her face. They would detect her roommate's face, but not her face. So this was around 2015, same time that OpenAI was created. She was already giving TED Talks about this. She was already starting to investigate this, etc. And mind you, I'm kind of in this frustrating environment where there's no Black people. I'm seeing these fanfare about people trying to save, you know, humanity from AI. I've had this whole journey that I talked to you about. And at this point, I'm like, send an email. And then 1 year later, so this is where it starts. And then 1 year later, in 2016, I go to this other iteration of the conference where now it's like blowing up. There's all sorts of blow up about AI and the hype, and it's going to save the world, whatever. But at the same time, there was this ProPublica article. So this ProPublica article was on crime recidivism. So this article talks about how there's a startup called Northpoint. And what they did was they purport to have a model that's trained on data of who was arrested, right? And how they were sentenced. They train this on data, and then they purport to determine someone's likelihood of committing a crime again. And so what happens is now judges, when they use this for, you know, pretrial detention to determine who should get bail, how much your bail should be set to, but also to be sentenced. So with other information, along with other information, they use this risk score for each individual that is automatically generated through training data. So this is Northpoint. Now, if you imagine the training data that they use, I don't have to tell you guys why this is an issue, because most people here understand when I immediately say this: policing in America, the percentage of what happens, percentage of people who, you know, who is arrested for drug-related crimes versus who commits them, why we even have a war on drugs, all of this history, all of this lived experiences, you all have it. So if you were going to create something like this, wouldn't be what this is. But the people who are creating it are people like my lab mates. So let me tell you, the people, one of them who was a founding member of OpenAI, the company that's supposed to save, you know, humanity from AI, is also actually head of AI at Tesla right now. I remember I was trying to tell him about my experience with police. I was telling him one time, 2007, I called the police because my friend was getting, we were all getting attacked. People were trying to strangle me like this. People are trying to attack. That's a whole different story. It's completely traumatizing story. So I called them on the behalf of my friend who was being strangled. And instead of helping her, they put handcuffs on her. So you have me calling the police for help. They put handcuffs on the woman who they could see the bruises and everything. So I was trying to explain to him, and he said, well, she must have been acting crazy. So now fast forward to the times when these kinds of crime recidivism, prediction and all of that algorithms are being created from the training data that we all know has issues by the people like this guy who choose not to understand or what kind of issues we have in policing. So in 2016, there was a ProPublica article about this that showed that these algorithms, unsurprisingly, these models are biased towards Black people. Let me tell you, okay, so I saw this article and it was just a light bulb. I've been having my own experiences, my own conversations. I've been going to these conferences and I'm isolated. I've been seeing these talks about saving humanity from AI by all white people, all white men who are going to save us. And finally, I see this article and I had no idea that this was happening. I had no idea there were models that were being used to do this kind of stuff. And that's when I sent an email to all the Black people I know in AI, like 3, 4. Hi guys, hello, how are you? You guys are Black and I'm also Black. And also I'm just worried. I go places, I don't see anybody who has any color. I think it would be cool if we could start a group called Black in AI. Like, I don't know what we would do with it. Maybe we'd just talk. I don't know, So then we started adding to it, and then we had a workshop at this very conference that I talked about. So instead of 5, we had like 100 Black people the first time. Then we grew it. Now it's like over 400 or 500 people who come from all over the world. Then we started having an academic program to break down barriers for people, Black people, applying to PhD programs, let's say in AI related fields. So based on our advocacy right now, for instance, UC Berkeley just announced, the computer science department announced they're dropping the GRE requirement. And that's based on like the research that we were doing in the academic program that was started by Redit Abebe, who's my co-founder of Black in AI. So I'm not sure if she's going to be at the panel. So that's how this thing grew. And then separately, Joy, like I said, I've been looking at her, work. She wanted to partner with someone doing computer vision for her master's. And so this was also in 2016. And someone forwarded me this, like, hey, Joy is sending this thing, you might be interested. And I emailed her, I'm like, hey, Joy, how's it going? I think you're doing really important work. Like, let's talk about this. I do computer vision. So we partnered. She was a master's student. I was a PhD student advising her. And for people in grad school, you know how unusual that is, right? It's like, that was it. It was just the two of us on that paper called Gender Shade. So what we did, because like I told you, she had seen that these computer vision systems weren't detecting her face. I said, okay, let's do something more systematic so we can make it digestible to the scientific community. So she worked on something more systematic. We showed that commercial, these systems that are used for face-related things, analyses, we showed that they had the highest error rates for Black women. And so how we did this is, we know, let me explain to you how your lived experiences and all the other experiences you have are so crucial for this field, right? I don't have to say this to people here. We know that race is a social construct. It's unstable across time. It's unstable across space. You can't use it as a proxy for certain things. You can't use ethnicity as a proxy for certain things. So people had done this kind of analysis using race or whatever, but we said, okay, let's use skin tone, something more objective that, what's the camera seeing? What's the vision system seeing? So we analyzed data sets. We annotated data sets by skin tone. We partnered with a dermatologist. First of all, we had to create our own data sets because existing data sets were overwhelmingly lighter skinned and overwhelmingly male. We created our own data sets, and when we analyzed the results of commercially, available systems from Microsoft, from IBM, from Face++, that they were selling to people and that people can use for anything. Police can use it for anything. Anybody can use it for anything. There was no kind of regulation saying what you can use for what. That these systems had very low error rates for lighter skinned men, but really high error rates for darker skinned women. And as the darker and darker you go, it almost approached random chance, right? It just didn't work. So fast forward to 2020, like, you know, it was a lot of activity. We published this paper in 2018. Amazon said that, and there was a lot of stuff we did there too, but Amazon said that they're having a moratorium on recognition, which is a face surveillance tool that they sell to law enforcement. Microsoft abandoned their work. You know, IBM does not doing face. So that originated from that sort of work that we started doing. So I guess to answer your question, you know, I wanted to answer it with context. To answer your question on why bias is, or what kind of harms can exist in this based on AI. This conversation has evolved since the time I started working on this kind of stuff in 2017, 2018. It was even hard to explain to people. I never told anybody when I was working with Joy, actually in my PhD. I didn't tell my advisor and tell anybody I was advising Joy, because it was hard to explain to anybody like what I was doing even and what she was doing. So, but now there are some other problems with the kinds of conversations that are being done around this area. But the issue is that, number one, the people working on AI are privileged. They're at the top of the stratosphere. They are not, you know, they're not members of impacted communities around the world. And so no matter what their intentions are, they're never going to be creating technology from the imagination of the members of impacted communities. And so we've seen time and time again. I wanted to give the example of OpenAI, which is a company that was created, then they said AI safety first. That was what they said in 2015. 2020, you have this language technology, GPT-3, that spews out racist and sexist text. That's not AI safety first from my perspective, right? And so you have people who are creating it, even when they're thinking of safety, their idea of safety is not, you know, not harming members of marginalized communities, especially Black and Brown communities, and other members of marginalized communities. The nature of the way in which this technology is developed right now requires a lot of data, a lot of computation power. And there's so many issues with that. First of all, which communities have all this data and all this computation power? And secondly, how are different communities represented in all of this data that we're talking about, right? So why did the face detection not see Joy's face? Why do we have GPT-3 kind of spewing racist and sexist text? Because the web, you know, the web is racist and sexist, because social media platforms like that. And so but at the same time, people are not catching up to what's going on. All of this technology is being proliferated everywhere. Health, we know biases in health, you know, we know by people too, and the data that's biased. Policing, all of that we're doing all this advocacy for. Hiring, people are using these models for hiring. And so there was just this news that Amazon had to abandon some internal hiring tool because it was just like flagging anybody from a women's college or anybody as like, no, not somebody that who should be hired.
Is part of the problem that this technology and the research surrounding it is in the hands of governments and corporations? How do we get this from those spaces into, how do we add representation or inclusivity? Or what do you think we should be doing?
I think that part of the problem is that it's in the hands of governments and corporations, and their incentives are not aligned with the incentives of, like I said, members of impacted communities. So I think that there's a number of things we should be doing. First of all, members of impacted communities need to be driving this conversation. So for instance, people in the Brooklyn tenants who were fighting against face surveillance, right? There was an incident where Brooklyn tenant, a landlord was trying to have, surveil the tenants in Brooklyn, and they were fighting against face surveillance, and they used actually some of our work to help them in this fight. Those are the kinds of people who should be at the forefront of conversations of bias, etc. So the problem is when these technologies are being built, those kinds of people are not shaping what this technology should look like. So I think that people from impacted communities need to be at the forefront and consulted very, very early on when this technology is being built. And there need to be independent institutions. I'm working on a research institute right now that's independent. We'll see how it goes. Independent, free from tech companies, free from even academic institutions, because academic institutions are not free from this at all. They're very intertwined with tech companies, the money that they're getting, etc. Like even with my situation and April Curley's situation, there was a meeting with Google people and HBCU leaders, and the HBCU leaders did not come out and say, hey, this is unacceptable. They were like, great, like, we still remain in support of Google, and yeah, this is just a personal issue and stuff. And me and April were both super disappointed with that, right? Because you would want to say it's not okay like that what you did to these women. So I don't think academic institutions are kind of free of this kind of influence either. But so, and then I think funding sources.
I represent no one here except myself, but
I know.
It's not okay.
And I think there need to be different funding sources, right? Right now, a lot of AI and technology in general, if you look at the history of AT&T Labs, etc., it's funded by DARPA, military, a lot of military-based things. And so we need separate funding for sources, right? And ideally, the move fast and break things model does not work. People need to slow down. But if your incentive is just profit, and they don't have, it's like sort of putting cars out there back in the day with no seatbelt, no sort of safety guards in place. The car companies had to be forced to do this stuff, right? They didn't by themselves sort of say, hey, we need to slow down, we need to test everything, we need to have safety guards. There was a fight, there was regulation, there was all sorts of stuff. So that's where I think we are. And in order for tech companies to do the right thing, they would have to invest a lot of resources. But if they're not forced to invest all those resources, it's against their profit-driven interest to do this.
And I know you've talked a little bit about regulatory structure. So I know you did an interview back in February, I think it was 2020, with Wharton Business Daily, and you talked about implementing internal incentives or forming external regulatory bodies. Is the work that you are doing connect with that?
So I was going to tell you that I think we need to do another iteration because I think we need to do another recording, like for a few more minutes, because I have to go.
Are you open to doing that? I would love that.
Yeah, we can do it. I'm sorry, like I went on and on, so I think we have.
No. That honestly, most people do not answer that first question, and it gives everyone incredible insight into who you are as a human being. So I would love to do more. So I'll hit pause here, and I'll write to them and find another time.
So maybe I think that, for instance, Friday's a good time, if that works for you.
Perfect. Let's do it right now. Friday at what time?
We can do Friday. Oh, Friday 11 a.m. Like we did last time.
Sounds
great.
Good? Yeah.
Okay, let's do
that. Thank you. Okay, I'll see you then.
Okay.
Bye. Thank you for joining us for part 2 of this one-on-one discussion with Timnit Gebru. So we're going to get started. We'll get warmed up with a few questions on AI and algorithmic bias. So I've got 3 questions for you. So the first is sort of what's the potential negative impact of algorithmic systems? So why is it so important that this is what we talk about and not some other technology?
Well, I think that all technology has potential for negative impacts. The thing about AI, I think, is it's now at a point where it is infiltrating many different parts of society without regulation and without safeguards. So I personally, this is just my opinion, listing, I've been trying to learn from labor economists or organizers and historians, tech historians. So Mar Hicks is one person I really read and try to learn from. And they talk about, so for instance, Mar Hicks talks about Ford or car companies, AT&T, big breakup of AT&T, the unionization efforts at car companies and how they were trying to break them down, break the efforts, the regulatory efforts, or the government trying to tell the car companies that there needs to be some safeguards, and how they were trying to resist it. So in that sense, I don't think whatever is happening right now is new. And another, in one of my earlier drafts of my papers, I wrote about also, you know, trying to draw some of these parallels. We also wrote about clinical health trials, right? So when you think about healthcare, and I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of other people who know a lot more about it than me. It's very similar to the kinds of issues we talk about in AI, because on the one hand, there are drugs that just don't work well for people, especially, I mean, right, recently people are talking about how genes of people of African descent are so underrepresented in many of these personalized drugs, et cetera, that people are talking about. So for instance, the African continent has the most diverse gene pool, but they only contain like 1% or something of all of these, you know, human genome projects and all of that. So now think about the next generation of drugs, cancer, and all of this stuff, and how it's not going to work for us. On the other hand, there's like, you know, drugs that were pulled off the market. For instance, 8 out of the 10 drugs that were pulled off the market, I think in, I want to say late 1990s, 1998 to 2000 something, had adverse effects on women. And it wasn't required by the FDA to disaggregate the results by, you know, race and gender, or race or intersectional kind of the demographic characteristics or anything like that. They weren't required to say, how well did it work on this subgroup population? How well did it, you know? So you have that on the one hand, you have those kinds of things where things are not being developed for us, and they're not working for us, and they are even having adverse effects on us. And then you have the flip side of the situation where they use this as experiments. So, you know, I don't have to.
The reason why the Belmont report exists is because of all these different things that have historically been done to communities of color and underrepresented minorities.
Exactly. So experiments and exploitation without people's knowledge. You know, the Tuskegee experiment is just one example, but all over the world, how they experiment on indigenous populations. And in some ways, I see a parallel with that right now, where, for instance, Google's health, AI health, whatever kind of team is trying to do experiments outside of the US, right? They try to pilot it in India and Thailand and Kenya, maybe, because I think this is why, you know, I've learned to be very cautious with what I say. You know, when is it my opinion? When you're going up against companies like Google, you have to learn how to do that on the fly. But in my opinion, it's because the rationale is that, oh, there's all of these countries in the African continent that don't have high data protection and data privacy regulations. So you can just experiment there, and you can do things quickly. You can see how it works. You can infiltrate whatever you can see, and then you can work backwards to places like the US, right? And Cambridge Analytica was a similar thing. So I guess I'm giving all of these examples to say that the thing about AI is it's not that it's new. It's not that, you know, there's some quality about it, in my view, where it's making it more dangerous or anything. It's just that it's at a stage right now where a lot of these other things were a while back. And the stage is that it is quickly infiltrating everything. Everything from policing to military to, you know, healthcare to just, you name it, hiring. And without safeguards and without regulation in place. And all of these issues that we discussed in terms of training data not, you know, being representative, but at the same time, training data also being taken in an exploitative way. Certain groups of people in privileged positions using it to experiment on people who are not in privileged positions, who don't even know what's happening. All of those things are happening right now at a very fast pace. And a lot of money is being put into AI because it's just so hyped up right now.
Mhm.
You know, like I said, when I was doing a PhD, I never even said I'm doing AI. I was in the AI lab. I only just talked about doing computer vision. And if it was something more specific, we would just discuss the specific things like machine learning, deep learning, whatever. Now it's just AI. Everything is AI. So that's why I think our communities need to be very vigilant, because it's being pushed into all sorts of different, very, very high stakes scenarios, from policing to hiring. Imagine, you know, imagine someone not being hired because a model decides maybe that, you know, you're too angry during your interview or something like that. And you can get, there are some of these models that are being used all over the world. So you can, in all sorts of job sectors, so you can be denied a job in all job sectors in all places, right? So that's the kind of impact that it is having. And so that's why I think it's really crucial that we discuss it. People say that it's the next redlining. It's like digital redlining. So that's why I think it's really important to be aware of it.
So I'd love I love talking to you, because some of my questions, I'm like, I throw out the window. She's like, she already answered that one. So I want to jump on to what you mentioned about data protection around the world. So there's a growing number of policies, most prominently, so GDPR is one that's on the list, on the lips of a lot of people, that govern the use of personal user data by tech companies. So how does this important right, user privacy, well, the right to user privacy relate to the need for tech companies to measure inequality and the impact of their services on different populations? So I'm thinking about inequalities by race, ethnicity, gender, age, or religion.
Yeah, so sometimes people say, so first I want to say that, you know, I'm not an expert in the GDPR. I need to say that because
this is opinion. So I love that you are sharing both your expertise and your opinion with us. We appreciate that.
No, I want to say that because there are people who actually are experts specifically on GDPR. It takes a lot of time to really go through the nuts and bolts and understand it. But so for instance, sometimes people talk about attention between collecting data to understand, you know, I want to give an example of like France, where they just said, you know, we don't have racism and it's not cool and whatever. So we're not even going to acknowledge race. You're not even allowed to collect data on people, you know, someone's racial makeup, right? And I mean, you can hear me. I go off on things about France sometimes, because, you know, the colonization that they did in the African continent, how they left it and all that. But this is so hypocritical, because there is so many issues of racism there. And the reason they don't talk about it is because people don't even have the language, or some of the things, at least in the States. I honestly, you know, there's so much discussion. People have books and we can talk about these things, right? And so if you're not even allowed to gather data and look at, you know, disaggregate it and look at the impacts that, certain policies or other policies are having on different racial groups, you're going to pretend like there's no issue, right? So some people say that, you know, some of these laws can make it more difficult to get demographic data to then, you know, test out some of the characteristics of your models or whatever you're doing, or your policies or anything like that, and see how well they do for different groups of people, or how they impact different groups of people. So for instance, in healthcare, people talk about that, you know, you need to protect someone's privacy. But at the same time, like sometimes, you know, people say, right, men and women even have different kind of symptoms for heart attacks and things like that. So you need to be able to disaggregate some of your data by these characteristics to see how it affects people. And so because of that, because I really do, one of the issues in the tech industry for me is that people don't value data related work as much as they should. And this is something I've been advocating for so much. It's not supposed to be, you know, intelligent or, you know, cool. Most of the time they're just talk about algorithms. But for me, data is crucial, and it's the foundation of many of the issues that we're dealing with, but also the AI, like the you know, the current kind of methodology. So because of these intricacies, in my team, for instance, we spent a lot of time working on data. So for instance, we had a whole, especially, so this isn't my team, but the people who worked on it were Alex Hanna, who's teaching at Berkeley now, actually,
Hmm.
who's a sociologist. I love Alex.
Writing that down. Gonna email Alex.
Alex Hanna, you got to follow her. She's amazing. She's also the first trans woman of color to be a research scientist at Google. So she used to report to me in the ethical AI team. And so Alex Hanna has a whole, and Emily Denton have a whole research direction called the genealogies of data. And in our team, the two of them and Meg Mitchell, who used to be my co-lead, wrote a gender annotation guideline. So that means, you know, like I told you, for instance, gender is a very, you know, you can't just look at someone's face and tell them ascribe gender. It's fluid. You can't also, there's appropriate ways to get that data versus not. Sometimes you don't want to get the data. Is appropriate ways to use that data versus not. So because this is not super simple, we wrote a guideline, and by we, I mean, actually they, I didn't write it. They wrote a guideline and gave different examples, different contexts, you know, what are the different tensions? There's some ethical tensions, you can't resolve them. You just have to look at the context and say, okay, this is my call, this is what I'm gonna go with. There are some ethical considerations. So I've also written a paper on some of these tensions and considerations. So, you know, that's what I'm telling you, I can't give you a straight answer because it is actually complex. And that's why we spend all of this time giving guidelines, trying to give people, you know, different guidance. If you're in this situation, this is what we, you know, recommend. If you're in this situation, this is what we recommend. So for gender, for instance, we made that kind of, we created that kind of document. But the problem is, you know, a lot of times in the tech industry, the disciplinary tradition that people are from, they kind of want to, oh yeah, this is the solution. This is, you know, like this is what you need to do. But actually, it's not so simple many times.
Let's stay with that, and let's stay with Alex Hanna. So I'm a sociologist, and when I mention to people that I'm interested in privacy and cybersecurity, their eyes sort of glaze over. They get very confused. So I'm excited that you're mentioning the name of this fantastic person that is a sociologist in this space. Can you talk to me a little bit about the need for different types of voices, the importance of interdisciplinarity in this field, and what we can do to open the floodgates for more people that not only look like us, but have studied different things than us?
Yeah, so I'm working on a new research institute, which I'm excited about, right? Like for the first time, I'm thinking about the future, and it's exciting, and rather than like, you know, all the things I went through in the past. But and the very first, one of the biggest foundations for me is interdisciplinarity. And you know, it's weird. I took this class at Stanford, and this CS class, and the professor used to have these weekend thoughts. And one of the weekend thoughts that he had, it really stuck with me. And he was talking about how in life, in physics, there's always tension between efficiency and stability. So if you look at like light sources, like the white light is it's the most inefficient light because it consists of all different kinds of photons of all different frequencies everywhere, kind of firing in different directions. It's very, very inefficient, but it's extremely stable. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have lasers that are the most efficient, but like extremely unstable. It's one type of photon, you know, very bright, very efficient. You have to cool it, and it's extremely unstable. And I find life, I think it's the same thing, right? Like we're missing biodiversity now because, you know, we have these large farms and we're all eating the same thing, very efficient, but one virus does, well, the pandemic, right? We're moving more and more towards more efficient and less stable, I think, world, right? And the tech industry is, I think, a big driver of that. So look at YouTube, look at all these different platforms, everybody using one thing, which might be efficient, but very unstable. So in terms of research and disciplinary traditions, it might be much more efficient to work with another researcher from the same tradition as you, because, you know, you understand each other. You know, I want to use some tool, they want to use some other tool. We disagree, you know, we agree on like what the format is and everything. So in terms of that, you might be able to move much more quickly. But I think the end result is like, I think you row on a boat in the same direction to a waterfall, right? Like there's nobody who tells you, wait, let's steer this way, right? Like, you know, you'll just really fast go in whatever direction you're going in. So I found that when we were doing interdisciplinary work, there's a lot of tension many times because, you know, I don't understand. There's a lot of traditions, like people that have, you know, people who've learned to do things in certain ways that I just never had to question my assumptions in that way about my disciplinary tradition or whatever. And other people maybe didn't have to do that. So it takes a while to get to some sort of thing that we all sort of agree on, but that thing is always better because it incorporates, you know, many different points of view that I would have never been able to see. So that's how I view interdisciplinarity. I think it's crucial at this point because we can see the kind of world that we're moving towards. We're moving towards like less diversity in all forms and everything that you're thinking about, but huge consequences. And so we have to see interdisciplinarity as a way to kind of move away from that and incorporate many different points of view. And sometimes you see even, for instance, you know, in anthropology, I read this, Ali Al-Khatib is another guy I really like, and he was an anthropologist and now in human computer interaction. So he wrote a blog post called Anthropological HAI. So he was kind of drawing parallels between anthropology and AI. And he even said that in anthropology, it had a heyday. Governments were investing a lot of money into it. You know, if you look at colonialization, you know, they sent a lot of anthropologists to study the indigenous people, and so it had a lot of impact, negative impacts that we are seeing with AI today. And so I would never have been able to learn from this person if he wasn't in my circle somehow, right? This is if it was just a computer scientist who didn't know anything about anthropology. So you can look at other disciplines and you can see, you know, you can try to see, okay, what were their mistakes? How did they approach, you know, what are the good things about what they did? What were their mistakes? And let's learn from them. And that's one thing I've been trying to do in my work is I've collaborated with historians, archival historians, because when you talk about data, archivists have collected data forever. I've collaborated with, you know, people who work on critical race theory, because when we talk about race and gender and whatever in technology, that knowledge is crucial. And just many different groups of people. And it's not just interdisciplinarity that's important. People with different lived experiences are crucial because there's just something about the experience that you have, like something registers in a way that doesn't when you don't experience something. And to me, that's also really important to bring people from many different, with many different lived experiences, because they'll have a different point of view on something, and it's important to incorporate that.
And it's so much more efficient to do what we've always done and to not go more broad and bring more people to the table. That tension is something that groups like to just jump over. Just like, oh, we'll do it next time. So let's stay on diversity. So you've talked about how diversity branding can hurt diversity. So that was in reference to Rachel Thomas's work. And in a recent tweet, you mentioned corporate DI departments should abolish because they block real change and endanger the lives of people that those offices claim to support. How can you imagine corporations should be held accountable for promoting meaningful diversity, equity, inclusion? And should it be by some sort of external entity?
Yeah, I mean, that's the email I wrote an email just being like, you know, you gotta, if you really want change, you have to hold leaders accountable and maybe also work on external stuff. And they were like, oh, she's telling everybody to stop on diversity work, you know? So Rachel Thomas's writings I have sent internally in response to all sorts of things all the time. HR emails me, I'm like, read this Rachel Thomas article, you know? And at Google, I just heard that Sherika, so the most recent diversity business partner that I met, I heard that she's leaving today. And then right before her, there was another one, Esther, she left. There's a really high turnover. And there's a reason for that. They don't have any, I mean, like my experience with these diversity departments, whether they're Black-led or not, unfortunately, is that they just block me from doing the things that need to be done. That's what I've experienced. We have a bunch of grassroots things that we want to do. Grassroots locally, I had made a lot of change at Google. Our team was, you know, very diverse, felt safe. We protected some other people collaborating with us. My manager completely changed. This guy was a different person when I first joined Google. He's now a totally different person. And that takes time. You can't do that at scale or whatever. It takes a lot of time and effort. And he even wanted to do some stuff. Like he wanted to make some changes. And the central diversity people would come in and say, no, we can't do that. At the same time, they do these things that just make no sense to me, like absolutely no sense. Why are you doing this thing? Why are you having this seminar? I don't, or why are you doing this fireside chat that none of us, asked for, or it just like, I don't know. Then they shut down the one training that we all the Black people really thought was working, and the allies and everybody, was Sojourn. And there was a CNBC investigative article about how they shut it down during the Trump era because a couple of white guys were complaining, right? So so they just, what I feel, and then at the same time, what they do, every time somebody, especially a woman who has done a lot in that space, is fired, do you know who answers the question about their firing? It's the diversity person, Melanie Parker. I remember when Meredith Whittaker, who organized the Google walkout for real change, that didn't come from the diversity people. That came from grassroots organizing. 20,000 people walked out, made demands saying the chief diversity officer should report directly to the CEO. We need an employee representative. We need this. That had a lot of momentum. And I think it even helped me in my situation, garner support and momentum. That wasn't because of the diversity people. That was because of Claire and Meredith and all of the other organizers. What happened? Claire and Meredith got pushed out. Who answers when people were trying to hold the CEO accountable? Who answers questions about Claire and Meredith being fired? Melanie Parker. Oh, Claire and Meredith are fired. Let's bring in Melanie Parker to answer questions. When I got fired, people were asking questions at the same thing. Who's answering the Melanie Parker? Let's bring in the Black woman to answer the questions because it looks better. And, and it drove me insane. And so I at first was thinking that, they should do something differently, but I am now convinced that that whole department exists to protect the company. And Sarah Ahmed is one person who writes about this. I've been reading her writings and talks about this, where she says literally corporate DI departments are there to protect the company from potential lawsuits or from potential, just to look like that they're doing something. And so for me, that has been my experience. Not only have they not helped me, they've just been blocking any change we could do, any potential grassroots, even at our local level changes we could do.
I'm very excited that you're founding something in addition to Black and AI. I say this as if you don't have a history of entrepreneurship, but so is it?
I did a startup once.
I think you told me about that in the first part of our discussion. Yes,
but it didn't really work out, so I wouldn't really call it a history of entrepreneurship.
Okay, all right. So recent plan for entrepreneurship. So I have a question for you, and it's something I grapple with myself. So as a Black woman, trying to occupy these spaces that were not built by us and for us, is there a way forward for us in those spaces, or is it entrepreneurship? And this is a personal answer for you. Again, not.
Yeah, I tried.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think my answer is that I have tried so hard, and I just decided to do my own thing because I do think, Google was very painful, but I did see measurable change that I created. But the problem is that you work really, really hard to do this iota of change, and it takes a big toll, and then somebody can just take one little action that just completely just destroys all of the changes that you made, right? So I worked really hard to create a space for people, marginalized groups who would have left the tech industry anyways. I worked really hard to convince my leadership team of, how they should change, except like my manager and stuff. And then this one person made a decision and all of that just went away. So what I saw was the limits of what I could do from the inside. And I thought that my efforts are best utilized outside. And so I can make, change outside. So with, for instance, you mentioned Black in AI, and with Black in AI, the reason I want to start it is because I got very frustrated with all of the other kind of diversity related organizations out there. And either they, if it's for women, they don't care about anybody except for maybe white and Asian women. If it's for, I don't know, there was nothing for us. And I also thought we needed something specific in AI because I could see it blowing up. So anything general like engineering or anything general like science or whatever did not work. And I also wanted it to reflect the interdisciplinary nature of AI. So if you're an artist working in AI, you can be in Black in AI. If you're a sociologist working in AI, you can be in Black in AI. We had Ruha's, so our last in-person dinner, we had Ruha do a fireside chat, and we bought 500 copies of her book. She did a book signing. We gave it to people.
She's speaking at our event. We only bought 50, but yeah, that's a lot of books.
Oh, girl! By the way, I think the rest of we didn't give away all of the 500 books, and I think some of them are at my desk at Google. So I mean,
so if anybody's there and wants a book, swing by.
Yeah, so that's what I think we wanted it to be. And so what I realized with Black in AI was that we first had to build a network, and we first have to respect ourselves. We have to say, for me, I was lucky because I decided to make that decision that I wasn't going to deal with certain things because I have a certain amount of safety net, right? I've been in the industry for 15 years. I decided this is a time in my life where I don't have to deal with certain things. Not everybody's in that situation, all right? Many people are not. Many people can't just lose job and figure it out like they're going to do something new. I mean, that's huge privilege. And so, so what I saw with Black in AI is that having a network and where we watch out for each other is very, very important. And we all collectively say, no, this is not okay. So for instance, Black in AI, queer in AI, women and underrepresented groups in widening NLP, natural language processing, all came out and said they're going to stop Google sponsorship right now. I think, if Black in AI just came out and said that, it would be, maybe not as strong. If queer in AI just came out and said that, or if, widening NLP just came out and said that, maybe. But the fact that all three of us are like, no, this is not okay what they did to us. April Crowley was a queer Black woman who did so much for Google and hiring HBCUs, right? So I kind of mentioned it last time, but, after we got fired, I think presidents of 5 HBCUs, and I think Howard is probably one of them, I don't remember exactly now, met with the Sundar, the CEO, and Melanie Parker. And after that meeting, people asked them about our situation, me and April, and I would have thought they would say, yes, what they did to them was unacceptable and we're not okay with this and all that. I just see the excerpts. It's like, yeah, we didn't really talk about that because that's personal information. And also, somebody was like, oh yeah, and I know some Black women who are at Google and they're happy and all that. And I'm like, you must be joking. That's not how change is done. I understand that you might be afraid that you'll lose your, sponsorship by Google or funding or whatever. But you also have to take a stand for your own people, right? If we are not taking a stand for our own people, why would I expect Google to respect me? So I think, that's what I've learned. I've learned that we need to have a network. We need to stand up for each other, and whether it's inside or outside. And for me, I've seen the limits of what I could do inside. I feel like I have made some change, but I've seen the limits of what I can do inside. And I think now, I think what I'm going to try to do is have a different model from what I've seen for research or from the corporate model, from the academic model, try to have a different kind of incentive. And the reason being that I think I can take whatever, if that's a hit for my career right now, I think I can take it. I'm at a point where I'm willing to take the whatever hit. I'm willing to take whatever monetary hit, whatever, career hit. I feel like I'm at that point in my career. I wasn't there like 10 years ago, right? I wasn't there like, when I was 22, but now I'm, 38. I'm going to be 40 in 2 years, and I'm done. I'm done with this. Like I can take that.
So here's a question for you, and I really appreciate that you talked about how deeply you thought about this decision, and that the place that you are in life allowed you to make this decision? Because I think a lot of us are thrust into these spaces and asked to be, I'll call it small W whistleblowers, because Black women don't get to be whistleblowers. We're troublemakers or thugs or problematic. But it sounds like either on your own or through your network, you made this decision in a way that was very thoughtful. So can you talk about whether you consider yourself a whistleblower, or if that's has ever come into your because I don't know very many Black women, who are
I actually
whistleblowers.
do, because what's interesting, I was looking at my tweets. My tweets are more like documentation for me sometimes. I was looking at my tweets in the days leading up to my firing, and I was asking people, do you know anything about whistleblower protection laws? When you get intimidated, because I was getting intimidated. I felt like I was getting intimidated into silence. And I told them, I wrote to my leadership team and I said, because one of the things that worried me, it wasn't about that one paper. I could, forgo that one paper, whatever. I didn't care. It was about the implication. For instance, we had social scientists in our team, and they often write critical work. That's what they were hired to do. That's their job. Like, what do you expect them to write about how great all the technology is and how well it's all working? And so I said, what kind of guarantee does my team have to do their work, to do their research? We just hired 3 new social scientists. What are they going to do? What are you going to do to them? Are you just going to try to silence them? And I even said that, there are papers about how big tech is following the same playbook of big tobacco and the fossil fuel industry to silence researchers. There are papers like that. So I was telling them that in my emails leading in our conversations leading up to this. And so I asked people, do you know, do you have that stronger? Do we need stronger whistleblower protection laws? And does anybody know about what these laws are? I didn't know them. And recently, this I think it's called Trillium. This investment firm, I believe, that has a lot of Google stock, had asked to vote on stronger whistleblower protection inside Google. Of course, Google's like, no, don't vote for it. But they said, what happened to me and what happened to Meg, my co-lead, was kind of classic, trying to silence whistleblowers, and the kinds of things they said, especially about Meg, that she was exfiltrating documents. What she was doing was looking through her own emails for our emails that I was in too, to like have documentation about the discrimination that we were facing, and especially I was facing, because they just cut me off of my email, right? And she wasn't even being coy about it. She wasn't trying to hide it or anything. She said, I'm writing a script to do this. And so they kind of used all of these terms, and that is classic what they do to whistleblowers. And so I do think I am a whistleblower in the sense that, I was trying to do my job and write the risks and harms of technology from the perspective of people in marginalized communities. If you see the author list of our paper, it's people from all sorts of different backgrounds. And so from our perspective, but they didn't want to hear it from our perspective. They want to hear from their own perspective, or maybe they just didn't want to hear it. So the short answer is yes. And Ifeoma Juma, who's a professor at Cornell. All right, she might have moved to North Carolina, but anyways, she's a labor economist, and she wrote an article in Forbes about this whole thing. And one of the things she said was that we have to strengthen existing anti-discrimination laws, and we have to strengthen existing whistleblower protection laws, because that also helps with some of the algorithmic bias components that we we're talking about earlier. Because if you have, who are the people who are going to be trying to speak loudly about algorithmic harms in our communities? It's going to be people from specific demographic groups. And who are the people who are going to be discriminated against for doing that? Same people from the same, demographic groups. So I think that strengthening these laws and staffing these agencies, I mean, right now there's really no incentive for the companies to do anything, right, to be honest with you. And so strengthening the laws and staffing these agencies like the Equal Employment EEOC and other kind of agencies, giving them more teeth is, I think, a very important way forward.
I think I might know the answer to this, but I enjoy talking to you so much that I want to go on the journey with you. So can you, speaking of major tech companies, do you feel that your experience reflects the larger relationship between tech and ethical AI researchers writ large? Or is there something that was very special about your experience?
Well, there is this thing that people say, ethics washing. And ethics washing is basically like, I think people also say greenwashing, right? Ethics washing is, oh, Sophia Noble, if you ever talk to her, she's really good at describing this. So she says, you know, like this AI ethics, the depoliticization of this work, making it look like it's completely divorced from the human experience and the larger geo-social political things that we always talk about. And they're always quote unquote controversial. Anything with respect to human rights is at some point considered controversial by someone, right? So a lot of people in this quote unquote ethical AI space, or AI, people call it AI ethics space, I think participate in this ethics washing because they write papers in a way that is so removed, so abstract, such that it's not controversial. And also a lot of times they themselves are not in real life fighting the battles that they talk about, right? So Joy one time talked about people treating us as cage curiosities, right? They're like, it reminds me of like the National Geographic, observe the marginalized individual in their natural habitat, that kind of relationship, which so in my talks, I always talk about this, and some people call it parachute science. It can be very exploitative. Here you are, a researcher in quote unquote ethics or fairness, whatever. You are writing papers about this population, but you're not in the workplace or in academia or whatever getting discriminated against. You're just writing papers about this population, abstract, accepted by everyone, getting best paper awards, ascending, getting tenure. That's what you're doing here. You're not collaborating with people in this population, and you're not really in real life lifting them up. So you're actually exploiting them. And so I talk about that all the time. And I gave examples of people working in the space early on in the 60s, Black people, women in the 60s. For instance, so this was an excerpt from a paper that my co-author, my co-lead, my former co-lead wrote. And, there was a lot of this kind of movement in fairness and machine learning, statistics, but whatever, it's the different names, but I think it was similar points when, they were working on the SATs. And so they were trying to show that like testing, all of these tests were actually discriminatory towards Black people and women sometimes. And they were, so a lot of the people who were writing these papers, they were very active in the civil rights movement. One guy was denied tenure because of he was called the most dangerous academic in the US. He was denied tenure. He was completely against the Vietnam War. And because of that, he was just, denied tenure and wasn't treated well, etc. So it wasn't a piece of cake. These people were just like writing papers and just ascending. So to answer your question, I don't think my experience is the norm for like other researchers in this space. I think there are a few people who are, like I say, take the fall. And I said in my talk, the fall is not a joke. It's serious. I was getting death threats. I was afraid for my life. I was getting the N-word and all sorts of stuff every day, coordinated harassment. There's an article about the harassment I was receiving online, and it was literally coordinated with fake accounts and all of that. And I didn't have the mental space to, really work on it or anything. So it wasn't a joke. Like, I'm much better now in the sense I'm excited about the future and all that. But initially it wasn't. So, so it's not really, the norm. But I do think that things are changing. I think the conversation like 5 years ago was very different. It's barely happened. Conversation now has evolved to be, what are we doing with AI ethics? Why, are we doing really the right? Are we really helping, or are we actually, hurting the actual the movement that we purport to be supporting, right? So that conversation has been evolving, and there are a number of people, I think, who walk the walk. Rather than talk the talk. But I would say that a lot of people talk the talk and don't walk the walk, and that actually can be exploitative.
What would it take for you to be willing to go back to tech? Is it possible?
God.
Is there someone walking the walk, someone talking the talk? I'm excited about what you have next, and I'm so excited to watch your trajectory. But I have to ask, before I ask you my favorite question, which is our last question, I have to ask.
Okay, well, I can't say never, because I might go back to a big tech company. It's just like I just can't see it happening right now. So I just can't see it happening right now, dealing with why should I fight institutions when I can create one? Hopefully it won't turn into that. But I think it's even mental energy wise, I can put the energy into doing the things I think should be done, rather than constantly just fighting and being demoralized and not even getting to do my work. So I don't see myself getting back into tech right now. What would it take? So look, I've worked at Apple, I've worked at Microsoft, I've worked at Google, I've been in, an academic institution and stuff. So at this point, what would it take? I can't see myself doing it, but I think that what I was trying to do at Google was create an island. And I think at the very least, I need an island. The larger company might be going in the wrong direction perhaps, but I just need an island of safety, and I need to be able to do my work. That's what they came after at Google. That was my last straw, right? I can't even do my work. I can't even work on my papers. And so censorship is not really, that kind of censorship is just not, it's non-negotiable for me at this point. So I need an island. I need some amount of autonomy. I need some amount of ability to create a space for people, marginalized groups who can critique technology, and leadership, at least in my island, that will allow me to do that. So that's what I would say. And I don't think there is anywhere like that right now. And, I don't know if people understand how few of us there are, like how few, in AI, how few Black women there are, like especially researchers. It's very, very few in these spaces. There are plenty of Black women doing great things around the world, by the way. It's not that they don't exist, it's that they just don't exist in these spaces. They're not created for us. So yeah, I mean, I can't imagine going back right now.
So I'm going to destroy this quote. It's one I reference often, and I wish I know who said it. But I have this one natural, beautiful, precious Black life. I am not going to spend it explaining white supremacy to white supremacy. I need an island. I need a space. So
yeah, Toni Morrison's quote, I love this quote that says the purpose of racism is to just stop you from doing your work. You just explain yourself over and over again all the time. It's just to get you distracted, stop you from doing your work. And it's true.
Miss Toni, thank you. So my last question for you, which is my favorite, is to ask, is there anything you wish I'd asked you? So something that you have not gotten a chance to illuminate. I can't be that good at this. Come on, there's got to be something.
No, seriously, I've talked so much. I mean, you asked me one question, I spent like 30 minutes talking about my life, right? So I can't imagine. Yeah, maybe what I want Howard students to do.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
There you go. Yes. So this is a mix of PhD candidates from HBCUs and also primarily white institutions, faculty. Our entire group, we're largely people of color, and we would love to know what you would like us to do next, please.
Well, so in my experience, I have been extremely inspired by undergraduate students. I don't know what it is about undergrads. I think maybe they still have hope for the future. They haven't been jaded yet, and they are doing, they have a lot of movement. So at Stanford, no, at Oxford, I think this group of students, I don't know if they're undergrads or not. They started this No Tech for Tyrants, No Tech for Tyrants movement, and they had this Google Recruit Me Not movement for people who are I mean, I know a lot of people. I don't want to stop people from going to Google. Get the money, get do your thing, and then at some point you'll be independent. But for people who want to be part of that movement, you can check it out. And they also, I think, are trying to assemble a list of companies in the tech for public interest space that we can all look into. And at Stanford, the students, the undergrads, I think, created this Justice for Timnit t-shirt. And so I think it's Ruth Starkman, who is like, this lecturer is printing these tickets, and also like I think now she has stickers too on laptops and stuff like that that you can have, and she is taking orders. Like she's using her own, I guess, travel funds to do this, which is crazy to me. And she started a petition to literally not allow Google to recruit at Stanford until they rectify, some of the harms that they've done. And I don't think this is going to go through, but at least it shows like that people are willing to stand up. People are willing to say, we're going to try to hold you accountable. So I think what I would like to see from the faculty, I would say, or students, is just like follow the undergrads. Look at what they're doing. I mean, it's really amazing. A lot of times, faculty might be jaded and there might be too entrenched in the system, but I see, the movement from the undergrads, and I think they're doing great things. And PhD students, it's kind of difficult to tell people what to do because the institutional incentives that we have force you to go a certain way. And I had to do the same. I had to sort of make sure that I was still aligned with the incentives until I felt like I didn't have to do that. So for PhD students, I would say, create a network so that you can collectively advocate. It's very important. What I learned at Google is that they try to make things individualized. So because they don't want you to see the connection between my situation and Meredith Whitaker's situation, or my situation, or April Curley's situation. They try to isolate you and say, this is an individual case. This is an individual thing. And I always, at Google, I always advocated on behalf of other people. So for instance, my co-lead, when she had to go to HR, whatever, I would go with her. All her meetings, all emails, we were together, everything. And they just didn't understand. They're like, when I started out there, I would be very upset and talking on her behalf and what's happening with her and stuff. And they're like, but what are the issues that you're facing? Like, what is your issue? And I was like, look, that right there, what you're doing to her, that's going to be me. That's me. I was right. I'm like, that's me in a couple of years. So that's why for me, it's connected. So what I would say is, collective action works. Collective action works. You might think that as an individual that you'll get farther, but generally collective action works because you can protect each other. When one person's voice is lifted and it's just them, it's very easy to do something to them. But when it's collective action, it works. And one last thing I want to say is something I've seen at Google that worries me is that a lot of the action, the collective action, well, a lot of, the activities I see within the Black Googleist network, I think they ignore the class aspect of it. So when we talk about, for instance, workers at Google, when you look at contract workers, there are a lot more Black people among the contract workers than the full-time workers, right? So I just, it's very important when we're taking collective action or doing advocacy work or whatever, not to confine it to the most elite of the group that we're advocating for. And so that's the other thing I would say, let's think about all of the different groups of people who might not have the ability to speak up because they're in a more precarious situation. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Timnit. Let me get your name correct. Thank you so much, Timnit. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It has been an honor and just such a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for making time, not once, but twice. I know I deeply appreciate you. I know the many students that participate in this program this summer will appreciate you. The many students around the world in all 23 of our locations, about 23 locations, 700 people will enjoy this.
Oh, wow.
This is
Amazing.
you are a gift. Thank you so much for what you have done, and I can't wait to watch and see what you do next. So thank you all.
Thank you. I'll keep you posted.
Oh, absolutely. I have your email now. So thank you all for watching this summer. And for the last time, my name is Naniette Coleman. It's been an honor to be part of this journey with you. For more information on SICSS-Howard Mathematica, please visit our website, follow us on social media, and join our email list. All the best.